Hi everyone, Christina Werner here. Welcome to another video at my YouTube channel and blog. Today I'm going to be taking a first look at the Hero Arts liquid watercolors. And these are actually really anticipated. I've been looking forward to these and I can't wait to give them a try. As of the recording of this video, I have not tried them at all. So on camera, you're going to see me giving them a try. And I'm going to talk about my experience with them. On the bottles, it says to shake well. This is just like any other liquid watercolors that I've used. And you can also dilute them with water or use them straight from the bottle. So pretty standard as far as that goes. So this is the color Dandelion. It does have the names on the bottles on the label. And I'm going to put them out into this palette here so that I can pick them up. In the past, I've shown a couple of different ways to use liquid watercolors. Sometimes I've picked them up from ice cube trays or from a palette, things like that. Most recently, I find using them from a palette is the easiest for me, just because I'm only using a little bit of color at a time. And at the end of this video, I will show you how you can let the color dry in the palette and then reactivate it and keep using it. And there is a little bit of a trick to that, and I'll show you. So I thought since this is the first time I'm using these colors, I would go ahead and do some swatches of each one of these and see how intense the color can be. Now, there's some things to note when I'm talking about the intensity of color. I'm using a water brush. This one happens to be from Prima. So all of the water that's being introduced to this is actually coming from the brush itself. In some cases, when you use a water brush like this, it's hard to control the flow of water. It's hard to know how much water is coming out of that brush. And as you know, with watercolors, the more water you introduce, the more diluted the color gets. So there is that to consider. I find the easiest and most convenient way to use liquid watercolors is with a water brush because it keeps everything very fluid and everything stays moving. With that being said, I was surprised that the mulled wine color wasn't quite as intense as I thought it would be. I loved the color, especially once I started lettering with it. Once I started making letter forms with that mulled wine color, I was really pleasantly surprised with how much I loved it. When I first did that swatch, I was like, oh, this is really kind of watered down. But I think it was just because my brush had quite a bit of water coming out of it. Once I started going with the color, I really loved it. I kind of didn't want to move on to another color, but I did. I moved on to the strawberry and dandelion and moss, and I kind of just went down in rainbow order all the way until the very bottom of that list of colors. One thing I noticed is that while there are only a few colors, there's only 8, I think the color selection is really good, especially because all of the colors seem to blend well with each other. I did have a little bit of trouble transitioning from indigo to art print brown, but I don't necessarily think those were meant to really flow into each other. So I'm going to do this quote or phrase, a couple variations of it, just to get the feel for all of these watercolors. And it also depends on your water brush. So you can't really make a judgment on watercolor paints by only the paints themselves because your impression does change with the instrument that you're using with them. So I'm going to continue with this Prima brush for this little phrase here, but I will eventually switch to a Pentel Aquash brush, which is my usual brush for brush lettering with a water brush. Like I was saying before, I really love how these colors transition from one to the other. I especially love that dandelion to the 2 green shades. I think that's really beautiful. So I'm doing some more, and this time I'm squeezing the water brush a little bit more so that as I letter and create these letters, they are a little bit more wet, and so that gives me the opportunity to blend colors a little bit more. So I'm just continuing lettering. So my experience with liquid watercolors really is limited to the Dr. P.H. Martin's line, and I've used their Hydrus watercolors, which are archival, and I've also used their Radiant concentrated colors. And I like both lines. The one thing that I find the most different between the two is that the Hydrus watercolors can sometimes be pretty grainy and they're not quite as smooth all the time. I think that's because I I'm assuming that it's because it's a pigment-based liquid watercolor, whereas the Radiant Concentrated is dye-based. And I make that assumption because the Radiant Concentrated colors do fade with light quite a lot, and dyes tend to do that as opposed to pigments. And so because Hero Arts says on their bottles that these are light, fast, and archival, I would tend to compare these to the Hydrus watercolors instead of the Radiant Concentrated, just for that aspect alone. Also because in a minute here I'm going to do some more lettering with the colors themselves, but after they've dried in the palette a little bit, and they do become a little bit grainy, and I think that's because of the pigments that are in the watercolors themselves. So for this white, I actually used a Dr. P.H. Martin's pen white for this. It's a nice consistency. I did dilute a little bit before I got going, and so that first line of words is really kind of faded back, so I will go over that with some more white just to kind of darken that up or make it more opaque. I loved doing a wash of color with these Hero Arts liquid watercolors. Just like with the lettering, the blending from one color to the next was excellent. I really enjoyed it, a nice smooth blend. And I also enjoy how bright and vibrant these colors are without being too pale or kind of starting to look pastel. I think sometimes you can get that kind of pastel look with watercolors, but these still have a nice soft vibrancy to them, which I really enjoy. So I'm going to move on to another quote. I'm going to go back to doing that same quote. And this was probably about, 30 to 40 minutes after I'd put these colors in the palette. And so you'll notice as I come into this green here that it starts to get really grainy. And this is when I kind of noticed, oh gosh, I'm going to have to mix these up quite a bit in order to get them smooth. So I started to mix them up. And then going into the blues, I had mixed up that really well, and then into the purple. So that first kind of transition into the greens was quite grainy. And then by the time I'd mixed them up some more, that was smooth again. So you can see how grainy those are. You can see the pigments in them compared to the smoother one down below. And then even the most smooth down here. So you really do have to mix those colors if they've been sitting in your palette for a little bit. And at this point I decided I'm going to go ahead and let these dry overnight on the palette and come back and see what happens, because I was sort of anticipating that they would dry up quite a bit. So like I said in the past, I've used the Radiant Concentrated colors from Dr. P.H. Martin's, and those, if they've dried in the palette, you can reactivate them and they're buttery smooth immediately. However, if you come back to the Hydrus watercolors, you do have to mix them quite a bit. So in this case, I had to do the same with the Hero Arts watercolors. I did have to mix them quite a bit until I got them nice and smooth. So in this case, I would compare these more directly to the Hydrus watercolors from Dr. P.H. Martin's. So it lettered really well, activating the next day, no problems. Here's where it is where you have to mix it in. I put in a few drops of water and then mixed it with my paintbrush or my water brush. So you can see all of those little flakes or all of the pigment still kind of clumped together. But the more you mix it and the more you allow the water to kind of soak back in and rehydrate those colors, the smoother it's going to be. So don't be afraid to let your colors dry in your palette a little bit if you want to. You can definitely do that. You'll just have to make sure to mix them again when you come back to them. So I'm reactivating dry colors and then doing some lettering with those. And they do blend really well together even after rehydrating them or reactivating them. I'm going to drop in some yellow here, and you can see the yellow kind of transfer and move around that very wet lettering. I'm going to move that along with my paintbrush, trying to get that color transition a little bit more smooth, even more smooth than it was. And then back to the screen. I did notice the most settling on the two green colors. I don't know if that's just because of how they're formulated or what the deal is, but those were the two that had the most kind of graininess before I smoothed them out by mixing them. So I'm going to do just a quick little liquid watercolor little piece here before I close out the video. Today's video is actually part of a blog hop celebrating Hero Art's latest release. These liquid watercolors are just a very small part of their new release, all aimed at paper crafters. Hero Arts is traditionally a stamp company, a stamp and paper crafting company, so I'm so excited to have them introducing these liquid watercolors as part of their new line. I'm using let's see, this is a Pentel Sign brush pen. My mind was blanking there for a minute. Just added that in there. Thanks so much for joining me today. I will see you guys very soon in another card video. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.